I'm just consistent with this, I think the kind of science I'll be doing like 20 years from now will be way better, just by the fact that I'm taking a little bit of time away from science. It's sort of counterintuitive. You're like taking time away from the lab to grow, but by the fact that you're growing, you're actually gonna be able to stay in the game longer and be much better skilled-wise, intellectual-wise, things like that. Because all good science starts with good ideas. And I think if you cultivate your mind in such a way and have ways of growing intellectually, you can actually engineer a system in such a way where you can consistently generate ideas and know that you're gonna consistently generate better ideas across time. And as long as you have enough space in your schedule to act upon the best of those ideas consistently, it's like an algorithm to just becoming the best scientist you could be for as long as possible. So once I realized the value of that, and Knight-Hennessy sort of forcing on that at me initially, but then after that, me actually intentionally creating space.
You started to welcome it.
Started to welcome it, yes. My name is Vidal Arroyo, and I'm a member of the 2022 Knight-Hennessy cohort doing a PhD in biophysics. I imagine a world where work is art.
Welcome to the Imagine a World podcast from Knight-Hennessy Scholars. We are here to give you a glimpse into the Knight-Hennessy Scholar community of graduate students spanning all 7 Stanford schools, including business, education, engineering, humanities, law, medicine, and sustainability. In each episode, we talk with scholars about the world they imagine and what they are doing to bring it to life.
Today we're speaking with Vidal Arroyo, a PhD student in biophysics. During our conversation, you'll hear Vidal's experience as a first-gen college student, exploring biophysics, poetry, and music, managing and coping with depression, making dad jokes, and so much more. Hey, what's up, y'all? Welcome to another episode of the Imagine a World podcast. I'm your co-host, Willie Thompson.
Hey, Willie.
Hey. You know what? Y'all know who we are at this point. I'm not Taylor. I'm Willie.
Yeah.
That's Taylor.
I'm Taylor.
Yep. And we are joined by a very special guest today in Vidal Arroyo. You already heard the Imagine a World statement, but Vidal, how you doing? Welcome to Imagine a World.
Doing good. Thank you for asking.
Oh, of course. We were having a lot of pre-episode conversation. Taylor, what was the question you were going to ask that I so rudely interrupted before we started?
Oh, no, that's okay. We were talking about hair because we were so impressed by your goatee this afternoon, Willie.
Oh, I thought we were talking about your beard and your hair initially.
Well, I mean,
weird.
it got to my beard and hair because it is, there's a lot of it.
It's nice.
But I was about to ask Vidal, I think the first photo I saw of you had like a pompadour thing going on.
Yeah.
That's what
and it was
called.
like really impressive.
Okay. I had no idea.
You have on your Knight-Hennessy photo, you have a swanky suit and a pompadour.
Yeah.
And have you had a lot of hairstyle changes over the years?
Yeah, well, this is a funny story because, so growing up, my dad's from Spain, my mom's from Mexico.
Yeah.
Okay.
And they both have beautiful hair. My mom's beautiful red hair. My dad, still full head of hair. He's like 50 something.
Lucky. Crazy.
Yeah.
Wow. So,
great genetics. And growing up, they were always big on us growing out our hair. Middle school.
Oh, look at that. Yeah.
I used to have hair looking like Taylor, looking like a little lion. You know what I'm saying? A little full on mane status, no beard, but a little. You already know. And then I think starting in high school, so I started wrestling in high school, and that wasn't flying. Unfortunately, with wrestling, you have to put your hair in one of those nets.
Yeah.
like a fishnet?
Like a kind of a fishnet thing, kind of wrapping over so it's not getting in the way when you wrestle. And I just wasn't about to do that. So that's when I started,
Okay.
Yeah. I just wasn't the vibe. It wasn't the vibe. So I did shorter hair up until, maybe about college. Then I started growing a little bit longer. I think the pompadour thing made sense at the time. My hair just grew way too fast.
Okay.
And when I moved out here, I'm from South Orange County, and the haircuts down there are pretty cheap, maybe $30 for 25 bucks for a good barber.
Yeah.
Up here to find a good barber,
What?
Dude.
Huh?
I know.
What?
It's wild. It's wild.
It's quite expensive.
Yeah.
First off, you said $25-$30 for a haircut. That's cheap.
That's with tip too.
Yeah.
Tip? That's cheap.
Yeah.
it's
that's
that's
what
cheap to
I could pay that in Louisiana. Yeah, that's cheap. Yes. That's what I consider to be cheap. Yeah.
Oh, I got to take out Georgia.
Yeah,
It's the long hair, man. It's the long hair.
Really? But
even in Louisiana, I would pay $25 for a haircut.
$25
For a long haircut.
It's got to be inflation. It's got to be inflation.
Yeah.
Well, I don't have hair anymore. Well, I don't have hair up top, but my haircut's $15, bro.
Yeah, I think think also part of it too is I also had a good barber down there. Shout out to my boy Gusto if you're listening to this. Probably not. You know, he's doing.
We'll put him in the show notes.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. We could tag him or something. But no, I had a good barber, and that's part of it too. Is like when you go to a good barber, you have a good conversation with them.
Oh yeah,
that's the whole experience. You know what I'm saying? But
relationship. Yeah,
it's a relationship. It's a relationship. But yeah, when I came out here, you know, the barber was fine. It wasn't like the conversation was okay, but like the price is just doubled. You know what I mean? Doubled.
Really?
Yeah,
it's like $50-$60
like $50-$60 with Tick now. So my hair grows so fast that I would have to get it cut like every 2 weeks or something crazy. So I'm now looking at this like, all right, are we about to budget $100 a month just for haircuts? I just wasn't feeling it. So I started to shave my head. Yeah, it's funny. I'm actually trying to grow it out now. So you guys are kind of like the awkward phase.
Yeah, I don't think it's awkward.
No,
it's a nice, it's a solid line.
It's a little awkward for me, but it's a little longer. It's a little longer. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wait, it's awkward because it's longer?
Yeah, because I'm used to like either it's got to be like kind of like close to skin, like real short. Like this, I kind of feel like I'm a Muppet. You know what I mean? It's like kind of like you got like a good centimeter.
Just there's fuzz?
For me personally.
Oh, interesting.
You know what I mean? Yeah.
It looks good on you.
Yeah. No, I appreciate it. I think it's also just got that like good round noggin. So just and it all grows sort of equidistant, right? So it's like your head just keeps getting on bigger, right? But I'm actually trying to grow it out like you, bro. Like try to see if I get that mane back. Because then I can save on haircuts, but then also. What I realized with this thing was that since my hair grew back so fast, I would have to shave it like every other day.
I see.
Okay.
And I was like, okay, I'm no longer spending, $100 a month, but I'm spending 20 minutes every other day to shave my head. I'm like, this is also dumb, so.
Okay.
We're still searching. We're still searching for that equilibrium.
For the happy medium.
Medium, yeah.
And what are you going to do about the beard and mustache? Are you going to let that grow?
I'm going to try to see. I think I used to do like a clean shave, but again, it likes to grow. And there's some interesting colors down there. I mean, my mom's a redhead.
Yeah.
The red shows up in the beard. And I feel like people are like, if I didn't wear a beard, people wouldn't know my mom's a redhead. Not saying that like, I need to wear a beard for people to know my mom's a redhead. But, it's like a genetic trait. I think it's kind of cool, So like might as well flex.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, look, we're really excited to have you on today for the pod. You have an amazing Imagine the World statement, as all of our guests do. But before we get into that Imagine the World statement, we'd like to know the world you were born into and have experienced thus far. With that being said, where are you from and what was your journey here?
As far as where I come from, so from Southern California, I was born in San Clemente. So have you guys ever been down to SoCal?
Yeah. Well, spent a little time in LA.
Yeah. Spent a little time in LA. Okay.
I've been on one trip to LA. That's about it.
So Orange County is north of San Diego, south of Los Angeles.
Yep.
And it feels a little bit kind of 50-50 of both.
Okay.
But also depending on where you're at in Orange County, it can feel more like LA.
Okay.
Or more like San Diego. Sort of like a gradient. Where I was born, San Clemente, is South Orange County. And I still grew up in South Orange County. So it's more like the beachy side.
Okay.
My dad worked at a skateboarding company. My mom was a dancer. So like, pretty, I don't know. I don't want to say stereotypical.
That's kind of very cool.
Yeah. No, it's chippy. It's hard to have stereotypes in Orange County because it's so diverse. But like, I would say definitely the skateboarding thing was like pretty on track of like, you're definitely from, California at least, but Orange County like specifically. Yeah. Okay. So, I grew up there. And honestly, like, what got me to Stanford was science, but I didn't discover science until like college. Like when I was a little kid, I was oscillating between wanting to be a musician and like wanting to like go to the military. Because San Clemente is really close to Camp Pendleton, which is where a lot of like Marines train, Navy SEALs train. So like growing up, I was like, it'd be cool to be a Navy SEAL or be a Marine.
Join the Marine band.
Yeah. And if that doesn't work out, try to start a band. That's sort of like what my contingency plan was.
I know. Two ends of a spectrum.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And I think science, I sort of found a happy medium between the two of like someone that's kind of gritty, but then also someone that's creative.
Gritty and creative.
Yeah. I like that description. I was wondering how you were going to swing that. That's great.
Yeah. I still think it's inside me a little bit, but sort of flexing out in different ways.
I'm curious about the music part. What are your roots there? I know that your grandfather was a blues musician. Am I right?
Yeah, I definitely lucked down the genetic lottery there.
Okay.
Yeah. So
the hair, the music. Bro.
Yeah.
Genetic jackpot, bro.
Unfortunately, my grandpa, he was balding, so he didn't get the hair and the music. Hopefully, I can keep both intact. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
He was a blues musician and actually a pastor, and he was based down in like Upper San Diego.
Okay.
But also lived in like Temecula, Murrieta, which is more like inland SoCal. I think just growing up, he was just like my role model. I just thought he was like the coolest dude. He'd always wear leather jackets to church. And I was like, dude, this guy out here is wearing leather jackets to church.
Wow,
like, that's
what a rebel.
To, you know what I mean? It's also funny. He had this particular leather jacket. It's not like a biker jacket. It's kind of like it feels like an old man 70s leather jacket.
Okay.
But he would always rock it. It was like his favorite jacket. And I just looked up to him and thought it'd be cool to be a musician. But to be honest, I didn't like playing my instrument. Like I didn't like.
Which was?
I started on guitar.
Okay.
Bass guitar and then guitar.
Okay.
But,
Okay.
yeah, but for me, what it was, I didn't like the practicing part of it. I liked making music.
Sure.
Mhm.
I liked fiddling on it. I liked, listening to a song and trying to dance in between the notes. But yeah, as far as actually like looking at sheet music and, practicing,
Sure.
like I was just like,
Yeah.
I'm like, this isn't for me.
Have you heard the joke about guitar players and sheet music?
Nah.
Well, there's one way to make a guitar player be quiet. Put a piece of sheet music.
Okay, so maybe that just means I'm a guitarist, not a musician, but that's neither here nor there. So this was like up until middle school, I was thinking these two things. The military wasn't out of the picture, but like also the military for me was like, all right, I should probably do that if like anything else I try like doesn't fall through.
Yep.
Okay.
Just because there's still a lot of things I needed to explore. I wasn't one of those people that like I knew the military was the only thing I could do that made me happy. So yeah, when I went into high school, kind of what the catalyst for me with discovering science was I started wrestling, actually. Joining the wrestling team. I grew up doing martial arts, but didn't do any sports before that. And the motivation at the time was just that, I was a 8th grader living his best life, getting a little husky, playing video games all day, like kind of do my thing, you know what I mean?
Okay.
And I was kind of like, you know what? I don't think this is sustainable. You know what I mean? Like, I don't want to just play video games all day and whatever. I kind of want to like see what I'm capable of. So that sort of was the impetus for joining the wrestling team. And yeah, things kind of just steamrolled from there.
Yeah, but wait, what's the connection between wrestling and science?
Yeah, that was the...
Yeah.
Okay.
This is how it rolled out. So I joined the wrestling team, and my first year I joined it. I was like 170 pounds, little to no muscle, just again, live my best life. And by the end of it, I was like 130. And this is also like not weight cutting. This is like 40 pounds of fat loss, like in the first year of wrestling. Maybe a little bit muscle mass, but mostly fat. And I just saw my body change, and then my confidence change as a result of that too. And I was like, oh my gosh, like I wasn't, genetically destined to be chubby. I just was lazy. You know what I mean? And like once I sort of realized like how much my body changed, I just became really fascinated with the human body, fascinated what it's capable of. And I think that naturally, I started becoming more interested in science stuff. And I had a lot of athlete friends who wanted to become physical therapists. That's sort of what I thought, like, oh, there's a connection for this to sports. There's a connection for this to the body. And so sort of due to like positive peer pressure, like they motivated me to apply to college. College wasn't on my radar before that because none of my family went to college. Like I said, I lucked out on the music lottery, but I wouldn't say I lucked out on the like educational pedigree lottery, you know? So once they said like, oh, you want to become PT? Yeah, you should go apply to college. I was like, all right. So this was like junior year of high school. Up to this point, I didn't really try in school. So I think if I would have gone back, I probably would have tried to just try harder in school earlier because it just would have opened up more doors. But things turned out, I was able to go to local school near where I was, Chapman. And, I was able to find a way to like make it work financially for me too. Which is really big being first generation, not having college funds saved or things like that. So yeah, I basically decided to go to Chapman, 30, 40 minutes from where I was. And I decided to commute by train because I didn't have a car at the time. Okay. So that was my basically go for the next 4 years was
every time you went to campus.
Every single day was commute by train. I had this little routine worked out with my mom where she worked really close to where the train station was. Okay. And so she would drop me off at the train station like before I would hop on the train. So that'd be like about 15 minutes.
Okay. Drop
me off in the morning, about a 30-minute train ride up to Orange from Laguna Niguel, which is where I was being dropped off. And then about a 15-minute walk, or if I was really ambitious, a little skateboard trek up to campus. So it was like a total about an hour one way. But I was able to work on the train, make it work. And my mom's a boss, so I was able to talk with her and have some good conversations on those rides. Yeah. So that's sort of what my little routine was. And then sort of do the inverse on the way backwards.
Okay.
Yeah. And at Chapman, you followed your interest in science by was a double major in biochemistry and molecular biology.
For people that apply to medical school, it's a double major, but it's one degree. Yeah, it's one degree. I had a friend of mine, I'm not going to name him, where he was like really trying to get in some good med schools, and he like listed them as two different majors. And I'm like, nah, fam, we're getting one BS for this. Come on, like this ain't a double major. But I didn't start as biochemistry. I actually started as kinesiology.
Oh yeah, kinesiology.
Yeah, because I was still thinking PT, exercise science.
Yes.
And my first year, I had to take because the program was very pre-professional.
Okay, got you.
At Chapman. So a lot of exercise science programs, you'll start off learning exercise science, kind of high level stuff. The people at Chapman were very stern of like, hey, you want to apply to these grad schools? Just so these grad schools require you to take chemistry, biology, physics, calculus, at least a year of all those and other stuff too. And so they made us do that first. And I guess in this case, it might have been slightly to the chagrin of the kinesiology department because that's what lost me. I actually like those classes. more than like the intro kinesiology classes. Like I was taking this intro kinesiology class. It was cool, but it was too high level for me. Like I didn't really get to dig deep and understand like why are these things working the way they are. Where like in the biochemistry or like the chemistry classes, yeah, they were getting real deep. They were getting crazy deep. And I was able to understand like, it's not, I didn't feel like I was memorizing. I feel like I was understanding. And I think that was what appealed to me about it. And then by the end of the year, I was like, like, I don't know if I want to do this PT thing. So what I decided to do, I wouldn't recommend this to everybody, but this was my way of deciding whether I wanted to stay in biochemistry or kinesiology. Was the next year I took organic chemistry, which is supposed to be a weeder class.
Yep.
For like people that are sort of more like chemistry or biochemistry, things like that.
Yep.
And then I also took like a whole year of physiology and anatomy. And I basically said, okay, we're going to take these classes. If I like the organic chemistry more, this is a weeder class. If I somehow like this weeder class, I'll stick in it. And then I'll try to find a way to switch majors. But if I like the exercise science stuff, I'll switch, I'll just keep my major.
Okay.
And so it just turned out that first semester that I did that, the anatomy class, there's a lot of memorization. So it's kind of the same thing. The physiology, again, there's more mechanism, but I still felt like I was kind of memorizing the mechanism. I still didn't really know like, okay, why exactly is this happening this way? Where like in organic chemistry, like, I don't know what it was, but somehow this weird class became my favorite class.
Mm-hmm.
And I just like sunk into it. And I decided like after that, like, man, I love this chemistry stuff too much to just stay here. So that's why I switched to biochemistry. And it actually is funny. Later I ended up becoming a TA for the organic chemistry.
Okay.
Initially it was a weeder class I was trying to decide a major on. And then I ended up teaching it for like the next 2 years, which is really funny.
You became the gardener.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Yeah. And so being at Chapman and you spend those years as a Panther, and then you go off to become your university's first Rhodes Scholar. Speaking of the lottery you were just talking about, if you were unaware of the educational lottery, if you start hitting the jackpot at that point when it comes to getting a Rhodes Scholarship, and what was that process of even knowing what a Rhodes was and being a part of that community by the time that you graduated from Chapman?
So this is, to this day, I think still one of like the craziest stories in my life. At Chapman, there's this term in Mandarin. I'm probably going to pronounce the tones wrong. I know the word, the way you say it. It's called longmen. And it's
longmen. Okay, yeah.
You know what it means, right?
Yeah.
Or like something along the lines. It's basically used in reference. My understanding is like the term refers to this thing called a dragon gate.
Yep.
But there's a story behind it, like this koi who's like swimming upstream. And then at some point he like gets to the top of the waterfall and becomes a dragon. I don't know if kois could actually swim up waterfalls. I mean, this is probably false. But there's sort of some mythology
salmon
here of
thing,
like,
but
this is how dragons came about. Is that you have a koi, there's just a koi that's like tenacious enough to swim up a dragon. But then there's a level of like luck to it too.
Yeah.
So somehow you're lucky enough to somehow time it exactly right when you're passing over, right when there's a little crevice of water not flowing down so you can get right above the waterfall. So I think the Rhodes experience felt like that a lot for me because up to that point, to be honest, like up until the summer of my junior year, I was not thinking about Rhodes. I was actually interested in doing a Fulbright, potentially in Israel at the time because computational biology is like a big thing, like really strong there. And my family at the time thought that I might have had some Jewish roots. So I thought that might have been interesting too.
And that would have been a research in Fulbright.
Research,
Fulbright
it would have been a research
grants.
Fulbright for a year.
Gotcha.
Yeah. But when I started setting an application for that, I was talking with the fellowships person. They were like, your CV is looking pretty strong. Like, do you want to consider some of these others? And I was sort of offended at first. I'm like, what are you saying? Like, I'm too good for Fulbright? Like, I want to go to Israel, but she was really adamant. Like, I think you should give these other ones a shot, And so.
Was this Dr. Julie Bidmead?
This is Julie Bidmead.
Okay.
Yeah. Do you know Julie?
I don't know her personally.
But we do our research.
You do. Okay, you do your research. There you go. So yes, this was Dr. Bidmead. And she sort of put this thing on my table and just, she didn't force me. But she was like, the world's your oyster. You can give it a shot you want. And so at the time, I started looking at this thing and, you can sort of get caught up in the aura of a lot of these things, right? And I was like, man, Rhodes, this looks like kind of hard. This looks like
hard in a good way or bad way? Like
in both.
Okay, yeah.
Both. It's like both like this could be really cool if I got this. Like it's almost impossible to get this, but also it's like this is almost impossible I get this. Like I might just be wasting,
right.
Like for instance, at the time Rhodes would let us apply with like up to 8 letters of recommendation.
Yeah.
And knowing my personality, I knew that I would max out on that. So I'm like, am I about to ask 8 professors to write a letter for me for this scholarship that I have pretty much no chance of getting? So, and what ended up happening is that at the time I was very like proactive on LinkedIn and I had this crazy idea, like, what if I somehow reach out to someone who won a Rhodes from the previous year on LinkedIn, who I feel like is a fit, like somehow like maybe some underdog from another school, right?
Yeah, someone that wasn't like building like, I don't know, micro gardens in Tunisia.
The Rhodes Mad Lib.
Yeah, the Rhodes Mad Lib.
Yeah. Someone that I could feel like, man, if this person had a chance, maybe I have a chance, right? So I connected with this dude, Noah Barbieri, and I just had a hard talk with him, and just asked him like, dude, like this is one thing I'm doing. My fellowship advisor thought I should apply for this, but I don't know. And once he just like dug deeper into my story, he was like, at first he was surprised I was taking the train for like 2 hours a day, up to this point, because our CVs look pretty much identical. And he's like, you've been wasting 2 hours a day on the train and you have the same CV as me. Like, what the heck? I was like, yeah, man, that's what I had to do. But, I didn't see it as a big thing, but he thought that was a big deal. And then, I think I also was able to tell him a bit more about sort of family struggles. Like my parents had really a lot of financial hardships, growing up, and, it affected my family. My dad was depressed for like over a year. And, there's a point where he was considering suicide, and that really affected me too. And so once he just heard a lot of these things, he felt like a lot of people think that when you apply for something like a Rhodes, that like they're really just looking at your CV. And I think they do use that as a way to filter out. But I think in terms of like selecting scholars, I think they, in that point of the selection process, tend to gravitate people that have, all these other, I don't want to say accomplishments, but all these other things beyond their CV. I wasn't going to put on my CV that I was commuting 2 hours a day, right? But like that was a part of my story that helped put some context into it.
Yeah.
And so once he heard these
connected the dots, if you will.
Yeah. Yes, sir.
Sounds familiar.
I have no idea where I heard that from. No idea where I heard that from. So once he said that, and he just said, I'm going to make you apply for the Rhodes. I didn't even know what he was going to use to make me apply for it. Just him saying that, I was like, yes, sir. I'm starting my essays now. You know what I mean? So that's what started the journey. But man, as far as like going back to the whole Longman story, like as far as actually crossing into, actually getting it, for me, that's actually where I really felt like I started to step more into my faith. So up until this point, I was, born and raised in the church. Like I said, my grandpa was a pastor.
Okay.
But to be honest, I didn't really have like a very serious relationship with God, like even during, those times in college. And, around that time, I just felt like God put on my heart the book of Joshua from the Bible. And I don't know if you guys have read the book of Joshua, but it's basically this whole story of like people of Israel having to step out by faith and things like that. And it's just like every time I open, the Bible and start reading a passage, like I felt like God was just like screaming at me and kind of giving me the requisite faith that I needed to like actually step out and actually like going with confidence. So that's what I really felt like was the difference for me, because I'm a very like naturally skeptical person, like being a scientist, like scientists.
Part and parcel of the job,
Yeah. I mean, being a good scientist, being rigorous, being skeptical, but unfortunately to make those kind of quantum leaps, in your career, you almost need to put that aside a bit. And that's where, I think like my faith really started to step into it. So yeah, that's sort of, I think, what allowed me to go in there with confidence. And again, to be honest, I don't think I was any better than any of the people that I interviewed with. I do just feel like God just gave me favor with it. And now I sort of feel like the onus of like, all right, he opened up this door. Like I got to make sure to step through it, but I also got to make sure to like kind of be faithful with the aftermath of that.
And, sort of having this context of like, being a skeptic, being a scientist, but taking a larger view of what your responsibility to your community is, we'll put it like that. You call yourself a humanitarian scientist in every bio that I could find of you. That seems connected to what you were just talking about. What does that mean to you?
It's an evolving definition for me, but where it started, so was something I didn't tell, sort of, there's a lot of parallel stories happening, along this journey. One parallel story I didn't tell you guys about that also relates to this was that when I was a sophomore in college, my research mentor was diagnosed with a stage 4 cancer. And he passed away like 9 months later.
Whoa. Oh, wow.
Yeah. He was really young too. He was like 37, 38. Young dad. He looked healthy too. He like, this is a stereotype with teachers that they have apples on their desk, but this guy literally had an apple on his desk every single time I came to his office, right? And that for me was like the catalyst of wanting to become a researcher, but the motivation wasn't, it wasn't curiosity. I think for me, that's coming over time. As I've learned more about science, I've realized how beautiful it is. But initially the impetus was like, I want to do this because I want to like save people's lives. I want to like alleviate the suffering that I saw this man go through. And so I think that's where the humanitarian aspect of it comes into it. But again, like I said, I think it's an evolving thing. I think there's different ways it manifests. Like I would say currently, I think the humanitarian aspect, the way that I'm playing into it more is finding time outside of science to do things that are more directly life-giving. I don't want to say the science is not life-giving. I just think that it's there are multiple steps in the way of from a discovery making an impact in someone's life, where there's other venues in my life where I feel like it's just a closer or smaller gap to jump. So I think for me, that's the way that I try to play into it more, is trying to find time to invest in writing poetry or doing music or things like that. A lot of those things I use as venues to talk about my own struggles I've had with like mental health. And I feel like in many ways, not only am I helping maybe break the stigma around some of those things, but also I use it as like an outlet to talk about the things that have helped me cope with those things, and almost use those experiences not as like something that's going to ruin your life, but as an opportunity for like deeper growth and depth.
Do you think that's how you've pretty commonly felt about grief or challenge, or do you think you had to work to get to a place where you figure out how to express and reflect on those things?
I'm going to tie this back in actually into some of the Oxford stuff, because for me, I've realized it's actually part of my creative process.
Okay.
But I didn't realize this until I went through it the first iteration. So talking about the Rhodes. So I got the Rhodes, I went to Oxford, and my first term at Oxford was like a slow but steady spiral downward. So about a month before I flew out, I was about to work with this researcher there, and he sent me an email just letting me know like I'm leaving the university to go full-time with a company that I'm about to start. And I was stoked for him, but I was like, all right, I'm a research student, so my entire degree is defined by working with a person. And I no longer have that person. So I wrote in my first term, I audited some classes, and just chilling out. I'm still meeting a lot of people in the Rhodes community and stuff. And I just took my time with finding a lab. Like I'll find time by the end of this term, and then, I'll have, plenty of time, 6 or 5 other terms to sort of sort out my research. So I joined a lab, and then a month later, this is in the new year. So this is 2020. My PI tells me, yeah, I'm also leaving the university.
Oh my gosh.
I kid you not, bro.
What are the odds?
Like lightning struck twice. So he was actually leaving to University of Manchester. The rationale was that his entire family was in York, which is like an hour away or 30 minutes away from Manchester. And it's like 4 hours away from Oxford. So this dude was literally on a weekly basis, Sunday night, driving up to Oxford, living in like another apartment, working Monday through Friday in Oxford, and then going back to his family during the weekends. Like living like, 2 lives at once. And he just like was like, dude, I'm just done with this. And I'm like, I also understand, but this also like
this is not ideal.
This is not ideal, right? So then I lose another term. And then by the time I joined a lab, about a month after that, COVID hits. COVID was really interesting because my housing fell through in the sense that the college that I was staying at, and out of grace for them, I'm not going to name it, but if you dig deep, you can find out what college I was staying at.
Public records request.
Yeah, public. I'm sure you can find that information out there, but they wouldn't let me do laundry. And all the laundromats were closed because they didn't want to deal with people with coins or anything like that during the pandemic. And I didn't have some like sweet connection in another college where I could like do laundry at someone else's college. So I basically realized after 2 weeks that, this is not sustainable. I'm not going to go into details, but you can imagine all your clothes being dirty and you're like, what am I going to wear tomorrow, right?
Sure, yeah.
So I decided with some housemates of mine or not housemates, they're actually other Rhodes classmates, to try to find another place.
Okay.
And we moved around for the next like maybe 4 or 5 months trying to find a place to live. The first place we moved into, we subletted, but then we sort of realized maybe a month into it that the people we were subletting, they're not allowed to sublet in their contract. And we felt super sketched out because these people fled the country during COVID. We have no contingencies. Like now we're just subletting from these people that technically legally, that we weren't aware of this, but now we were aware of it.
Okay.
And so then we had to work for like another 2 months to find a place. And obviously I'm involved in all this, right? So I'm involved in all these things. Long story short, it's like my research falls through. And at that time, research was like what I was using to define myself.
Yeah.
I grew up as a kid, like talking about the whole wrestling thing. To be honest, I did wrestling because to some aspect, I didn't like myself. I was trying to fix myself. And then after wrestling, science became that way that I defined myself. And so then when you're defined by this one thing in your life and it falls through, you have nothing.
You have
nothing. You have what's left. And at that time, that's basically, it's interesting with the Rhodes experience because during that brief 2-3 month period applying to it, I felt like God very closely speaking to me. But then after that, I kind of went back to just working all the time. It's not like I was reading my Bible regularly or anything like that. It's just whatever. And then during that period, just in Oxford, I was depressed, very skeptical. I was really like doubting, like even if God exists and things like that. And I kind of gave myself, I guess, the space to like really be like, all right, like, what do I actually believe? And like, why do I believe it? And in that period is actually funny enough when I started writing music again. That's what eventually birthed this album that came out. Yeah, it basically was my way of coping with the depression. There was a lot of stuff that I was running away from years ago personally that I finally had art as a way to deal with it. And like at the end of that process, once I kind of brought all those things to God, it's like I was actually able to step into him. I would actually say like for me personally, I would consider that's the time of my life that I actually like gave my life to Christ particularly, Before that, again, I grew up in the church, but it was sort of more like a cultural thing than something that was actually personal for me. That was the time where I was like, no, I actually believe this. And I believe it because this is the only person in the entire universe who validates me simply for my existence and nothing else. I felt like even myself, I validated myself by the way I looked, how smart I was, things like that. I really felt like God loved me simply because I was here, not because of anything else. And once I had that, it's almost like it allowed me to just move through all the grief and like a sort of security. But it's interesting because, then I, eventually come out here to Stanford, and I also have another kind of, I guess, like another bout of depression in a way. You start grad school, I felt like Oxford all over again, kind of having things ripped onto you. I'm not in a lab, sleeping in later than I probably should, and being like, man, what's going on again? And then
I remember I put on an open mic session the first quarter that you were here, I think. And I remember you came and you read a poem. Mm-hmm. You read a poem about your transition to Stanford and kind of the difficulties there. So I noticed that you were reflecting and expressing in that moment that kind of difficulty.
Well, and again, I think for me, what allowed me to start moving through that process of grief again was actually poetry. And for me, the music is also a form of poetry. I would say largely it's all under the umbrella of poetry, and then music for me is a side thing. Not everyone's like that. For some people, they're more into music for like the instrumentals. Mm-hmm. Think of like EDM artists. They're not writing poems with bangers in the club. You know what I mean?
Poems.
Maybe they are. Maybe there's some out there, spitting over their tracks or something. But most people are just, they're trying to make beats or whatever. So, but no, for me, it was really a poetic thing. And then as I did that, and that's a piece that I'm working on now. That poem that I wrote is like a larger piece of something I'm working on right now.
Okay.
That allowed me then to also come out of that. And so the way I've seen it, depression runs my family. I think to some extent, I'll always be kind of going around these cycles in my life, of like coming out of it and then entering another process of it. But I don't look at it anything. Like I used to look at it as something that was like this really big hindrance in my life.
Yeah.
Or something that really whatever. When I actually realized, I think for me, when I enter stage depression, it's more like it's like my soul recognizes a truth that my mind has not come to terms with yet. That's what happens every time I get depressed. And so now I know how to resolve that incongruency. Now I'm just like, okay, there's something that I know deep down that I don't want to admit yet. Mm-hmm. That's why I'm depressed. Let me dig into that. And as a process of that, that's where these art pieces emerge.
Okay.
It sort of initially became just a byproduct of me trying to live in the world, but it's sort of become like a bit redemptive. And then every single one of those cycles, I feel like I also grow closer to God. I feel like I want to say I level up, because it's not like God is like, leveling up people or whatever, but I do feel like I mature more. I'm mature more spiritually to just like another level. And I now look at it as like this kind of weird way of thinking about it. But like the next time I get depressed, I actually think I'm a little excited about it, because I'm like, dude, that means that like some other great piece is going to come out of this. Mm-hmm. That means that I'm going to grow that much deeper into who I am as a person. Mm-hmm. Instead of looking at it as, some hindrance, look at it more as just like, this is part of who I am. Sometimes I get depressed just because I'm actually coping with a level of sadness that I think some people just don't want to cope with at that moment. And instead of trying to shove it down, I've learned to more kind of create space for that and sort of try to see where it leads me.
It's a really moving reflection on a number of fronts. I think first and foremost, it's because of the imagery of fellowships and programs like Rhodes and Knight-Hennessy and the inherent joy that people just assume being a part of those experiences includes. Yeah. When people don't see just how difficult it can be to be a grad school student, at a place like Stanford, to have all these opportunities, programs, events thrust your way, and they're trying to swim through all that and figure out what matters most. That's first. The second is the idea that depression is not something that you remove from your life. It's something you learn to deal with. I think it's a very nuanced take on the reality of what it's like to be human and to have things that affect you in your life. I mean, I forget who you mentioned Joshua, I believe. I forgot who in the Bible, I think they said was technically like clinically depressed. Was it David? It might have been David.
If you read some of his Psalms, he definitely has some sad boy vibes in there.
Yeah, for sure.
Time. Yeah.
And I think there's some aspect of just like, what does it mean to just cope with these things that we struggle with? Yeah. I think that's quite unique. And the third thing I would say is actually related to your imaginal world statement about, I think sometimes you can interpret your imaginal world statement about work being art as the work that you do professionally or the work that you do in affiliation with an institution. But I think a lot of what you've articulated is about the work being about the work you do as an individual and the art that comes out of that, how overarching that is, and understanding sort of your purpose in life and how you want to navigate it. So I want to thank you for sharing that. I really think that's a very powerful reflection. And I find that, and I hope that folks who are listening maybe struggle with depression can find some sense of solace in some of the ideas you're talking about in terms of getting help and making sure you know how to navigate those spaces, even recognizing when that happens.
Absolutely.
To that point, I want to get your thoughts more squarely on the Imaginal World statement. And this is, how do you think about the connection between work and art, and how our world might be improved by the fact that people are viewing their work as art and treating it with the tender and care that it should, if that is the case?
For me, I think the statement is partly rooted, I think, again, in my worldview as a Christian. And in this case, seeing people as beings made in the image of God. And that means different things to different people. For me, when the Bible starts off, what is God doing? He's creating. God's creative. So what does that mean for us as humans? That means that we also are creative. I think in every single one of us, there's an artist to some extent, you know, and art looks very different for everybody, you know, like, for instance, I'm not a painter, but I have different canvases in my life that I paint on, sort of metaphorically. And I think right now in society, again, I'm not just going to use a sort of a broad statement to say that every single mental health issue is because people don't have opportunities to be creative, but I actually think that some of it could be in part due to that. I'm thinking of people being on the internet all day, or social media, or, you know, just consuming. We're always consuming. But then we give ourselves little to almost no time to then output. Ultimately, our minds are information processing systems. Just like a computer, you input information and it can output information. But if you don't have any output going on, your mind just gets flooded with just information and thoughts that has nothing to do with it. And then there's incongruencies that arise that aren't reconciled. And that's what starts to create this dissonance that can then lead to some of these things. You know, again, I'm not saying this is the case for every single one of those. Like for me personally, I definitely know it's something that runs in my family. So even if I was living the perfect life, I know I'd probably have seasons where, you know, struggle with things like that. But I did recognize that, like, man, actually being creative is actually like a huge solace. Creativity is also a way that you can serve others. Imagine a world where work is art. Part of it is hoping to see a world where people are willing to step into their creativity more. But then for me, the way that I think about it is, like, again, about going back to the scientist thing, is like, practically, how are we actually going to get to that world? And I think that that ties into sort of what I'm trying to do now as a researcher. So a lot of what I've seen, at least in science, is like, again, I love science in the deepest cell in my body. You know what I mean? Like, it's part of who I am. And yet at the same time, I do recognize that the way that science is currently constructed, scientists don't really have a lot of time to do poetry, to make music, to do art. We're sort of constrained by the system to just produce and produce at a very high level consistently. And it doesn't leave much room for else in the day. And so a lot of what I'm actively thinking about, I work in a machine learning lab. So what I've thought about is, like, what are ways that we can automate mundane tasks that scientists do in the lab, so they can have that same output, you know, that can keep them afloat in the job market, but then also save time in their day so they can have more time to do creative stuff, to sleep. You know, scientists need to sleep too, like anybody else, you know, and things like that. So that's sort of also the way that I'm thinking about it, is like also thinking about, like, what are the things that I can do as a machine learning researcher, as an AI researcher, to create tools that can make scientists' lives easier, so then they can have opportunities to not only let more of their work during their day be that creative, artistic, you know, the things that you can't offset to an algorithm, things that they do, so their work as a scientist is more creative, but then also giving them space in the day where they can do other creative pursuits that are fulfilling to them, that is not just the work, if they so choose so. You know, some people, they just love doing science all day. That's cool. If they're healthy, they're fine. Mental state's cool. Like, I'm cool with it. But I think, unfortunately, a lot of people, that's not the case. And so I'm trying to think back to, like, how can I serve this community that I love so much, in way of trying to create tools that can automate things and just keep more people in science and people doing more creative work in the long term.
So since you've arrived at Stanford and are sort of pursuing this, striking a balance even just between these two things, this work and this art, how has that manifested for you in the Knight-Hennessy community?
You know, I think a lot of this desire for, like, artistry, you know, I felt like it was a bit revived when I first came out here tonight at Stanford. For some context, I worked in industry for the year before, and unfortunately, my industry job I had, like a typical 9 to 5, 9 to 6. Sort of had a very fixed schedule. Didn't have really much time for anything else besides sleeping, working out, doing my thing.
Yeah.
When I first came here, like I was surprised. I mean, my first year here, dude, I did like 2 retreats. I was like, wait, I'm spending 2 weekends, 2 whole weekends. That's time I could be doing P-sets. I could be doing, coding, whatever. And I'm going out to Santa Cruz. Like, come on, like what are we doing here? I first was kind of like, man, I feel like, no offense, I feel kind of lazy, just like kind of going on all these retreats.
That's so interesting because it's so antithetical. That feeling is so antithetical to the balance you were just talking about.
It is. Yeah. Well, this is part of my development.
Right. Yeah. Of course. Yeah.
But I sort of realized like, wow, Knight-Hennessy, they're literally in many ways forcefully creating space in our schedules to take us away from our work, to help us think bigger picture and things like that. I've realized how much I grow exponentially when I create time outside of just doing research to be creative, to do things, poetry or music or other things. And I think for me, I've seen that growth in my life as I've been here, like, over the past year. And I've been like, dude, like if I'm just consistent with this, I think the kind of science I'll be doing like 20 years from now will be way better. Yeah. Just by the fact that I'm taking a little bit of time away from it's sort of counterintuitive. You're like taking time away from the lab to grow. But by the fact that you're growing, you're actually going to be able to stay in the game longer and be much better skilled wise, intellectual wise, things like that. You know, because all good science starts with good ideas. And I think if you cultivate your mind in such a way and have ways of growing intellectually, you can actually engineer a system in such a way where you can consistently generate ideas and know that you're going to consistently generate better ideas across time. And as long as you have enough space in your schedule to act upon the best of those ideas consistently, that's like an algorithm to just becoming the best scientist you can be for as long as possible. So once I realized the value of that and seeing how Knight-Hennessy sort of forcing on that at me initially, but then after that, me actually intentionally creating space.
You started to welcome it.
Started to welcome it. I started to welcome it. And I started to see, even during these retreats, again, I go on a 2-day retreat and then I come back and my vision of the world is like now shifted, completely. Or like, you put in HD, I don't know what the exact visual metaphor is best for this case, but like, it's just, you see it completely differently. And then you can start to recognize problems in it differently. You can start to find new solutions to it that previous angles didn't allow you. And as I've seen that, I've just recognized the value of it. And I've realized as a leader, sometimes you have to be the first person to do something differently. And I think for me that I feel a bit of the onus, like, it's not normal for you to create time in your schedule to do these creative things, that aren't as productive as other things. But again, I think every single one of us have to find a process that we know works for us the best. Right. And sometimes you may be the first person doing a process like that. So I think for me, seeing Knight-Hennessy, seeing the values in body, being I'm trying to think the exact vernacular they use, like being like independence of thought. Is that the way they call it?
The King Leadership Framework, right?
What is it? Civic mindset, independence of thought.
Yeah.
Hey man, don't put me on spot.
There's a third one. What's the third one?
It's independence.
Civic mindset.
Purposeful leadership.
Purposeful
it
leadership.
Is purposeful leadership.
Civic purposeful leadership.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good job.
Yeah. I don't know if I get those points for that.
Yeah. I mean, honestly,
you win the quiz.
This would be a hilarious take to do, like on social media. If you just went around asking, so what are the
what are the
3 criteria for Knight?
Well, I actually think I got a leg up on that because I actually interviewed for Knight-Hennessy twice.
Oh,
yeah, I interviewed for this twice. I reviewed this whole thing twice. So, so I definitely think I unfortunately have a leg. For better or for worse, I have a leg up on that. Yeah.
And actually, that makes you pretty well suited to sort of the last couple of rounds of questions we have. We're sort of gliding into the home stretch of this time with us now. And something we like to ask everybody that comes on the show is to provide some advice to anyone who's thinking of applying to Knight-Hennessy. Like you said, you've done it a couple of times. What would you say to someone who is considering applying to this program?
For me, I actually think, and maybe it's just me personally, the area that I needed to grow the most in when I came into Knight-Hennessy, but I feel like when I applied to Knight-Hennessy, I felt like the civic mindset thing was definitely there. Tying back to the humanitarian thing we talked about. Purposeful leadership, I don't think I've had too much issue identifying what I want to do and how I want to lead in that way. But I always felt like the independence of thought thing was real tough for me. And I think it's something that I personally don't think it's commonly employed enough when people apply for programs like these. I think they're always looking for, what do they want? That's always the question they get.
Sure.
What does Knight-Hennessy want? What do they want to hear? How do I tickle their ear?
What's the golden ticket?
What's the golden ticket? And the reality, it's sort of the thing you don't want to hear. And it's also probably cliche, but I think it is true. Like the whole be yourself thing. But I think even to an extent, that's maybe a little, like, I think the second time I applied, I was myself to an extent that I would consider potentially slightly bombastic.
Okay.
But
What do you mean by that?
all my improbable facts were puns.
Oh, okay.
Every single one of them.
Okay.
I made sure, like, these are all going to be dialed in puns or some ridiculous. Actually, it was like a mix of dad jokes and like just dry humor.
Right.
Yeah.
Living in England will do that too.
Yeah.
You know, the humor's very dry there. But yeah, it was almost to the point where I was like, the information here is kind of interesting. I'm just kind of making a joke out of this part of the section.
Yeah. Yeah.
But, you know, you can't see that part of me in any other part of the application. And that is part of my personality. So I felt it was important. But yeah, I mean, there were other things too, where I just kind of like, you know, the way I wrote my personal statement, most applications that have people look at my essays, I decide, you know what? I like this essay. I don't even want to look at it. I'm just going to send it off. Just the way it is. I want it to be just raw thoughts just from this one noggin. I think that actually went a long way because I felt like the first time I applied, I don't know if this factored much into how things worked out that year, but the first time I applied, I felt like I was a bit, I don't want to say people pleasing, but I was, kind of looking for like, what do they want?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. It's captivating.
It is captivating.
Yeah.
It's a very human thing, right? And then the second time I applied, I was like, dude, I already didn't get this the first year. Like, I'm just applying for it because I'm still eligible, you know?
Yeah.
And then I got it that year. And I remember the call I got from John Hennessy. It was just, I mean, it was awesome. Just obviously getting a call from John Hennessy. But after that call, I was like, what the heck? This was the one fellowship that I literally didn't like try hard in this year.
Yeah.
And so I'm like,
man, that resonates with me so much because funnily enough, so I applied to Rhodes in the same year that I applied to Knight-Hennessy, did not get it. And it resulted in me realizing, oh, you know, these things happen. You apply for these things like this, but then life goes on because, you know, that didn't work out. And I realized, oh, wait, but you know, my life doesn't end. It goes on. And what I want to do with my life and the people in my life and the things that are bringing me joy are all still there.
Yeah.
Wow. And then I get this opportunity for Knight-Hennessy.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden it's like, oh, you know, what are the stakes here? The stakes are just be yourself. And I think you're hitting on something, you know, everybody that comes on this podcast, I think each person has probably said some variant of be yourself in the application.
Yeah.
And it's so true.
Yeah.
But another aspect of that is being comfortable with yourself, not just being yourself.
Absolutely.
But being comfortable with yourself.
Absolutely.
You're speaking of it as if it is like, you know, not trying hard, but that's not really what it is. You just were able to exist.
Yeah,
as
exactly.
you.
I mean, I think actually, you know, I've actually learned this as I've written poetry. I think my best poetry comes from like the unfiltered stream of consciousness thoughts.
Yeah, sure.
You know, when I don't put filters on what I say, obviously there's certain things you shouldn't say in a fellowship app. That's pretty common sense. Like you guys are
name
what those
Like
are.
what? Yeah.
I'm not gonna go to. There are probably things we probably should say on this podcast.
Yeah.
So I'm not gonna go to details.
Part of things you don't want on KHS Airways.
Yeah. So, but you already know those things. Like beyond those things, I mean, and honestly, if you really are concerned, just write your essays and then filter for that at the end. You know, just make sure it's G-rated at the end, whatever. But like at the end of the day, I mean, I think the stream of consciousness stuff goes a long way. I think the first essay you write, sometimes, even though it may not be the prettiest sounding essay, maybe you need to fine tune a little bit.
Yeah.
But sometimes what you're saying is actually more true than anything you write after that.
Yeah.
You know, because after you start filtering what you just wrote and then filtering that, sometimes you get so far away from what you're trying to say initially, or what really I should say is not even what you're trying to say initially, what's really lying under, like down underneath. Because I think that's ultimately what these fellowship applications should be, is trying to almost peel back layers like an onion. You know what I mean?
Yep.
Or an ogre.
Or an ogre. Okay. That was a good.
That was a good. I was going to make a Shrek joke, but you
so sorry.
beat me to the punch.
I did. I was over eager. I'm so sorry.
Shrek is also one of the only animated movies to have a solid 4-movie run. But either way, in my
Cars and Toy Story.
Shrek too, but it's all right.
I guess Toy Story is probably 4. Wait, what'd you say?
I'm not a big fan of Shrek 2. I thought Shrek 2 was all right.
Oh no, but I'm just saying. So the animated movies, it's really hard to get 4 that are like they're serviceable. I think. I think Kung Fu Panda's gonna strike out on this 4th one because I don't think the Furious 5 are
Pollock and Jack or something.
No, I don't think the Furious 5 are featured. I think that's kind of weird. Anyway, this is totally an aside, but yeah. Speaking of the improbable facts discussion, as we close out this episode, we love to hear you talk about an improbable fact that you could share. And I would just say before we get into the improbable facts, I appreciate your feedback to people who are applying. Ashwin also basically embodied a similar things when he just applied with 2 weeks left to the application. It was like, I didn't have time to filter. I just submitted it. And I'm also a Rhodes reject 2 times over. So it's nice to know that I have company here. My co-host.
There you go.
But improbable facts, what you got?
Well, one improbable fact I was going to say, and I sort of actually said this, was that all of them were dad jokes or like close to it.
Yeah.
You know, but I'll give you a very specific dad joke. So my favorite that I remember is I said, I don't know if people would get to this laughing. For me, I know a good joke, you know, probably it's worse with the delivery, but for me, a good joke is like one that makes me laugh before I even start saying it.
Okay.
So this one is, okay, it says, I beatbox, but I don't box beats nor engage in, sorry.
Get it together.
No. And nor do I engage in combat sport with any other root vegetable.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Let's just take a minute there.
Yeah, I'm trying to. That was.
I beatbox.
I
But
got
I don't
it.
box beats, nor do I engage in combat sports.
Oh, okay.
Right.
All right. Got
Yeah,
you.
yeah.
Beats. Got it. Okay. Yep.
Yeah.
Sorry. Without the spelling, I was. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I'm visual
Yeah,
spatial.
two dudes-
There's layers. There's
Yeah.
layers. There's
Yeah.
layers to that one.
Wow.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
Wow.
Actually, is onion a root vegetable?
Bro, I don't.
There's another layer in there. Oh my gosh, I didn't even think about that when I wrote that. Woo!
Willie and I sitting here
I
in
was thinking
stunned
of
silence.
potatoes, but I guess onions are also root vegetables. Yeah,
maybe.
Yeah, there's
Bro,
at least 4 layers in there.
Yeah.
We are far beyond my knowledge of horticulture at this point. Although we might have to follow with Emily Russell to see how her microgardens are going. But anyway, look, Vidal, it's been great. Thank you so much for being on the pod today. It's been such a pleasure to have you.
Thanks, man.
And of course. Well, with that, we'll leave it here. But thank you again for sharing your story and for being who you are. You mentioned a lot of the stuff you struggle with, and this is sort of mentioned in Austin's episode in terms of him being someone who lights up a room. But even from first day of being in our cohort, Vidal, you've been somebody who shines bright in the cohort with the pompadour. That's what it's called.
Pompadour.
Pompadour or the buzz cut, man. So you've been a steady fixture of light in the community. So I appreciate
you, G. That means a lot. That means a lot.
Of course.
Yeah. And for the people that are listening, if you're thinking of applying, just do it. You'll thank yourself.
Nike. Oh, look at that.
Just do it. Don't let your dreams feature.
Yeah, Phil Nike. Can I get a pair of Nike? Anyways, another time. A little flex. All right, that's it.
All right, man. Appreciate you coming. Take care.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Imagine a World, where we hear from inspiring members of the KHS community who are making significant contributions in their respective fields, challenging the status quo, and pushing the boundaries of what is possible as they imagine the world they want to see.
This podcast is sponsored by Knight-Hennessy Scholars at Stanford University, a multidisciplinary, multicultural graduate fellowship program providing scholars with financial support to pursue graduate studies at Stanford while helping equip them to be visionary, courageous, and collaborative leaders who address complex challenges facing the world. Follow us on social media at Knight-Hennessy and visit our website at kh.stanford.edu to learn more about the program and our community.